Today, I'm breaking down every melee build. Light attacks, slams, glaives, you name it. I'll cover the strongest arcanes, the best subsumes, and more. By the end, you won't waste another second on builds. You'll know exactly what works and why. We'll start with a standard IPS light attack melee, since these are the most common. For light attack builds, there are 7 key steps. Step 1, choose your arcane. This sets the tone for how you'll mod the weapon. For this example, we'll start with Melee Influence, the strongest and most common arcane in the game. And don't worry, I know everyone's tired of seeing it. I'll also cover other arcanes later on, and when it actually makes sense to skip Influence. Step 2, pick mods that support your arcane. Since we're running Influence, we'll build into electric damage and slot in Weeping Wounds for a massive 440% status chance boost. This, along with Blood Rush, are the 2 core mods for light attack builds. That 440% boost to both crit and status chance is incredibly powerful, and it dramatically increases our chances of activating Influence. Step 3 is base damage. Here you've got 2 main options: Condition Overload or Primed Pressure Point. Condition Overload almost matches Primed Pressure Point with just 2 status effects on an enemy, and it pulls ahead with just 3 or more. If your melee has 3 unique elements, always use Condition Overload. Even if you don't, it's still worth it if you have primers, which we'll cover later. Before moving on, let's talk about why stacking the same mod types gives diminishing returns, and why it's better to diversify. For example, say you have a melee with 1000 base damage. With Condition Overload and 3 status effects applied, you're hitting for 3400 damage, a 240% increase. But if you add Prime Pressure Point on top of that, your total only jumps to about 5000. That's just a 49% increase from 3400, instead of the stated 165%. This applies to every stat: crit chance, attack speed, status chance, all of them. So the key takeaway is, mix different types of mods to maximize your damage potential. Before we get into crits, let's quickly talk stance mods. These are important. They can affect attack speed, give force procs, and add extra damage multipliers. There are far too many stances to cover in this video, so your best bet is to check the wiki and find the stance mod that works best for your weapon and playstyle. Step 4 is crits. And let's start with one of the most common questions: Galvanized Steel or Sacrificial Steel? Most people will tell you Galvanized Steel always wins, but that's not always true. In a vacuum, Galvanized Steel is the stronger mod. We can calculate the average damage multiplier with this formula. For example, take a weapon with 20% base crit and a 2x multiplier. With Sacrificial Steel, you end up at 64% crit chance for a 1.64 damage multiplier. With Galvanized Steel, you only get 42% crit chance, but thanks to the much higher 4.4x crit multiplier, it works out to about 2.4 instead. Now, add Blood Rush at 12x combo, which you'll basically always have in a light attack build, and Galvanized Steel still comes out ahead, even if you're stacking 5 Tau-forged Violet shards and Tenacious Bond. So for light attack builds, Galvanized Steel is almost always the best choice. But with something like a Glaive build, the math flips. You usually won't be running Blood Rush, and instead, you'll want Amalgam Organ Shatter for faster windup speed. And if you want an easy way to check which mod is better for your own builds, I've got a chart linked down below. Since this is a light attack build, I'll slot in Galvanized Steel. One thing to consider is Sacrificial Steel is always active, unlike Galvanized Steel. So you might still run Sacrificial Steel, even if the damage is a bit lower, for the extra consistency. Step 5 is attack speed. For light attack builds, it's one of the most important stats you can add. It's a direct multiplier to your DPS, while also letting you build combo faster and trigger status effects more often, which is key for proccing things like Melee Influence. I usually go with Berserker Fury, since it gives the highest bonus at 70%, but Primed Fury or Quickening work just as well. Step 6 is range, easily one of the most powerful stats for light attack builds, even if it's not immediately obvious. Primed Reach lets you hit roughly double the number of enemies on average, trigger things like Influence more reliably, and build combo faster. It's insanely strong, even if it's a little tricky to explain mathematically. Just remember, primed reach gives double the range of normal reach. So if you don't have the primed version, I'd skip modding for range. Last but not least, we have Layer 7, Final Multipliers, also known as faction mods. These do two things. First, they multiply your final modded damage by 1.55x, and that's after crits. So if you're critting for 10,000, that jumps to 15,500. But here's where it gets crazy. They also double dip on status effects, and with melee influence, they actually triple dip. Normally, when you proc a damaging status like Electric, faction mods apply twice, once to your base damage, and again after elemental bonuses. But when melee influence spreads that status to nearby enemies, faction mods apply a third time. So instead of just a 55% boost, you're looking at 1.55 cubed. That's a 3.72x multiplier to your status damage. Absolutely broken. If you're not a fan of running faction mods, you can swap it for Galvanized Elementalist. It works like a weaker, universal faction mod. Not nearly as strong, but it works against all factions. You might be wondering how I'm staying at 12x combo so easily. There are two main ways to do this. First, you can run double dexterity arcanes on your weapons, which increases your combo duration by 15 seconds. You could run combo duration mods on your melee, but they're not really worth it. They take up valuable slots and actually give a smaller bonus than double dexterity. The second option is running Naramon as your focus school. This makes your combo decay to the next highest value, instead of dropping all the way to 0. You can also run a combination of these methods for maximum uptime. I'll quickly cover Tenakai mods. They give you a free heavy attack that doesn't consume combo whenever the icon pops up, but they're not essential. My go-to picks are Dreamer's Wrath and Discipline's Merit. What you're seeing here is a blueprint for IPS light attack builds. The final mod slot is flexible. You can run a faction mod for maximum damage, or Galvanized Elementalist if you want something more universal. You might be wondering why we're not modding for Viral or Corrosive, even though they're some of the strongest elements in the game. Running Viral with Electric takes up too many mod slots, and Viral can easily be outsourced to external primers, which I'll cover later. Corrosive would be strong too, but it requires Electric to make, so you'd lose out on melee influence if you tried to mod for it. Modding for Viral and Electric can work if the weapon has an innate element, like Cold. Normally, adding Electric would merge into Magnetic, but if you add Viral first, then Electric, you'll keep the Electric damage. Now let's look at some situations where it might actually make sense to skip influence on a light attack build. The main alternative here is Melee Afflictions. This causes enemies to gain 6 extra status stacks whenever they're knocked down, lifted, or ragdolled by your melee. So how do you know if your weapon can activate it? The easiest way is to check the stance mod on the wiki and see if any of the combos apply lifted, knockdown, or ragdoll. There are way too many stances to cover here, but let me give you a great example. The Spinner X with Coiling Viper is a great candidate. Its main attacks apply lifted, which makes proccing afflictions easy. On top of that, it has innate Toxin, which makes running influence awkward, since you'd have to sacrifice 3 mod slots just to fit Electric. And right now, there's a bug where Lifted is giving 12 stacks instead of 6, which makes afflictions even stronger. Now, you could still run influence here. It's that strong. Just make sure you use unranked 60/60 mods to boost Electric weighting. Another option is Shock Trooper, which lets you run influence without needing to mod for Electric at all, saving you 3 mod slots. I'll cover helmet options in more detail later on. There's also niche arcanes like Melee Vortex. I use this on my Korra build for extra loot. You'll need to evaluate your setup and decide what works best. But for light attack builds, influence is nearly always best in slot, followed by afflictions. Slams work a little differently than your standard light attack builds, but once you know the key differences, they're insanely strong. Starting with arcanes, the 2 most universal options for slams are usually Melee Exposure and Crescendo. And stick around, because at the end of this section, I'll show you a super quick way to fully stack Melee Crescendo. No specific frames, subsumes, or even focus schools required. Melee influence can still work, especially on something like the Archetytron, but since you can't spam slams like light attacks, it's a bit harder to keep active. And because slams already have huge AoE, it's not quite as essential. You can also run an Affliction's Gas build if your weapon can proc it from slam attacks. The Coat of Mire is a great example. For slams, stance mods generally don't matter. The slam attack animations are typically the same across all stances, and so are the damage multipliers and force procs. That said, it never hurts to check the wiki just to be sure. For base damage, Condition Overload isn't used because the damage bonus does not apply to slam attacks. You'll either want Prime Pressure Point or double Sacrificial mods. Also, the mod Seismic Wave is essential, since it's multiplicative with other base damage sources, meaning you won't get diminishing returns. For crits, both Galvanized and Sacrificial Steel are viable. Check the calculator in the description to see which is best for you. Another key mod is Galvanized Reflex. This keeps you at 5x combo, which will multiply the damage of your heavy slams by 5x. You can skip this if running melee Crescendo. If you're not running a melee influence setup, you'll almost always want primed Fever Strike. It adds toxin damage, which is important because enemies with shields have a shield gate that slam damage alone can't bypass. As you can see here, I'm not able to one-shot a level 1 Corpus because of this, but toxin damage lets us bypass it. On top of that, elemental mods multiply with your modded base damage, so the 165% boost from primed Fever Strike is much stronger than it looks. Attack speed and range are fully skippable on slams. Range doesn't apply at all to your slam radius, and attack speed's effect on slams is negligible. Faction mods are strong, but they're not always needed unless you're running a status-based slam weapon, like the Archetytron, or if you're running Xata's Whisper. Xata is actually double dips with faction mods. More on that later in the Subsumes section. If you want to go all in, you could also run Arcane Fury and Nira mods on your frame. Here's the blueprint for slam builds. The top is a standard raw damage setup for most slams, and the bottom is for a status-focused melee influence build, like the Archetytron. Sacrificial mods can be replaced with Galvanized Steel and Prime Pressure Point. Use the empty slot for faction mods, or bonus damage like Gladiator Might. If you're running melee Crescendo, drop Galvanized Reflex for a heavy attack efficiency mod, and again, use that empty slot for faction damage or other damage boosters. Now here's a quick tip for stacking melee Crescendo fast. No frames, subsumes, or even focus schools required. All you need is Magus Anomaly. Pop in and out of Operator to group enemies, then do a slide kick. That opens them all to finishers, letting you full stack melee Crescendo in seconds. You can also use the new Scioted for grouping, depending on what works best for you. And finally, let's talk Glaives. These work a bit differently than other melee weapons. First, decide if you want a Volatile Rebound or Quick Return setup. Rebound is more hands-off. You throw the glaive, it bounces around, and does all the work. The downside is a smaller blast radius, and you'll need to maintain 12x combo. Quick Return gives bigger AoE and no combo upkeep, but it's spammy since you'll be heavy attacking after every throw. I'll start with a Quick Return build on a Influence Glaive, using the Falcor as an example. The Falcor already comes with Forced Electric procs, but we're adding Shocking Touch to boost our electric dots. On top of that, it gives a 90% damage boost to our modded base damage. Stance mods don't matter since glaives are throwable. We won't be using any of the base attacks. Condition Overload doesn't work on glaive explosions, so skip it. I run double sacrificial mods, though Prime Pressure Point or even Killing Blow for faster windup speed are all fine. The key is to stack at least 2 windup speed mods, so throws feel snappy. Think of it as the Glaives version of attack speed. For crit, Sacrificial Steel usually beats Galvanized Steel on Glaives, since we're almost always pairing it with Amalgam Organ Shatter for the extra windup speed. With Tenacious Bond active, Sacrificial Steel ends up giving a higher average damage multiplier on heavy attacks. One essential mod for heavy builds is Galvanized Reflex, which keeps you at 5x combo after every heavy attack. If you're running melee Crescendo, you can swap it out. From there, I'll add melee Elementalists for extra wind-up speed, and finish with a faction mod. They triple dip with influence and give by far the best damage. If you don't want a faction mod, you can run Power Throw, which is actually multiplicative with other base damage sources, but it requires the catch and throw combo, which I find annoying to maintain. In that case, go with Killing Blow. The rebound build is similar. Swap Reflex and double sacrificial mods for Blood Rush, Weeping Wounds, and Prime Pressure Point. Since you'll be at 12x combo, the extra crit and status chance are just too good to pass up. What you're looking at is the blueprint for influence glaives like the Falcor or Zorus. The top build uses Volatile Quick Return, and the bottom is a rebound setup. You can swap faction mods for Killing Blow or Power Throw. For non-influence glaives, I'll use Glaive Prime as an example. Melee Duplicate will be our arcane here, but Melee Exposure and Crescendo are also solid choices. And don't just aim for 100% crit chance with Duplicate. Around 130% is actually the sweet spot, since that extra hit from Duplicate can roll for orange crits. I'll include the exact formula in the description, but for about 99% of melees, 130% is ideal. If your crit chance is within roughly 10% of that, Duplicate is a great pick. Otherwise, go with Melee Exposure or Crescendo. For the build, Sacrificial Steel gets me to 140% crit chance on heavy attacks, which is perfect for Duplicate. Then it's the essential mods: Prime Pressure Point, Amalgam Organ Shatter, Elementalist, and so on. Most of these carry over to every non-influence glaive. Of course, some weapons require adjustments. Take the Serrata, for example. You'd run Primed Fever Strike to boost Toxin procs. Just use your best judgment in cases like that. Now let's go over the best subsumes for melee, and when to use each one. Keep in mind, I'll only be rating them on melee performance. I won't factor in extras like Nourish's energy gain. Roar is the most universal pick. It acts like a faction mod, multiplying your final modded damage, and it even double dips on status effects, or triple dips with melee influence. Nourish applies viral to your weapons, which sounds great, but you can already prime enemies with viral externally. I'll cover those methods right after this section, so stay tuned. One drawback is that it can actually make melee influence less consistent, since it shifts your elemental weighting towards viral, which caps at 10 stacks. Where Nourish really shines is at low ability strength, because with less viral weighting on your weapons, you get more electric procs for influence. Shock Trooper is very underrated. It adds electricity to all your weapons, which is the strongest element due to melee influence. The big advantage is that it won't merge into other elements. This allows you to run unique elemental combos that you wouldn't be able to normally, like Corrosive and Electric. It's also perfect for weapons with innate elements, like Toxin, since you'd normally have to burn 3 mod slots just to add electric damage. The only drawback? It does require an augment mod on your frame. Wrathful Advance gives flat crit chance. So if a weapon has 5% base crit, and Wrathful gives you 200%, that weapon now has 205% crit chance. It's perfect for weapons with very low crit chance, or just for the dopamine hit of landing constant red crits. Eclipse is niche. It works like Roar with the same 30% multiplier, but it doesn't double dip on status effects, making Roar better in almost every case. The one exception is Eclipse applies twice on glaive explosions, which makes it strong if you're running glaives. And finally, Xata's Whisper, probably the most broken subsume. It gives your melee an extra damage instance, basically multi-shot for melee. For example, if you're hitting for 10,000 damage, with a 100% Xata's buff, that extra hit will also deal roughly 10,000 damage, so 20,000 total. It might look weaker than Roar at first, since Xata's only gives a 26% base bonus versus Roar's 30%. But what makes Xata's Whisper really strong is that it double dips with faction mods. Add a primed faction mod to our original example, and the first hit jumps to 15,500 damage, while the extra hit from Xata's now deals 24,000 damage, instead of 15,500, due to the double dip, for about 40,000 total. It's also better against damage attenuated enemies, since an extra damage instance scales better than just stacking more damage. And on top of that, it adds void damage, which deals extra damage to Overguard and Thrax enemies. In summary, if you're unsure, go with Roar. It's the most universal. Nourish is best with low ability strength. Shock Trooper is great if you want to save mod slots for Influence. Wrathful Advance is best for low crit weapons, or if you just love red crits. Eclipse is only worth it on Glaives. And Xata's Whisper is king for slam builds, especially when you pair it with a faction mod. It's also your strongest pick against damage attenuated enemies. Now I'll share some of the best primers. Perfect for light attack builds with Condition Overload. There are two main companions for priming, Hounds and the Diriga. Both have pros and cons. Let's start with the Hound, and I'll break down all the key mods. What you're seeing on screen are the core mods for our Hound primer build, and the two empty slots are flexible. Synergized Prospectus is the core ability. It lets your Hound AoE prime everything. Momentous Bond gives us an extra element for Condition Overload. Vicious Bond gives passive armor strip. And Duplex Bond creates Hound clones for additional priming. Manifold Bond lowers the cooldowns of your Hound's abilities, so you can prime more often. Pack Leader keeps your Hound practically immortal. Every time Overguard breaks, it gains half a second of invulnerability. Since we're constantly hitting enemies with our melee, Overguard keeps refreshing, letting your Hound stay alive indefinitely. And Vacuum for obvious reasons. And before I move on to the Diriga, just remember, mod order matters. Mods in the top left have the highest priority. For the Hound's weapon, mod for Viral plus Electric, then stack as many different elements as you can for priming. If you already have Viral covered through something like Nourish, swap to Corrosive Cold instead. For the Diriga, here are the essential mods, and like before, the remaining two mods are flexible. You can use whatever you want. I've already explained some of these mods earlier, so let's focus on the new ones. Arc Coil is the main priming ability. Assault Mode lets us prime enemies further away, since Arc Coil is limited to 10 meters. Primed Regen keeps our Diriga up longer, since we don't have Pack Leader to keep it immortal. Tenacious Bond gives extra crit damage, which is one of the Diriga's main advantages. The Hound isn't able to hit 50% crit chance, but Diriga can. For our Sentinel weapon, we're using Burst Laser Prime. It comes with base IPS and can reach 50% crit chance with just one crit mod. Mod it the same way as the Hound weapon. Just make sure to slot in one crit mod for Tenacious Bond. Both companions can also proc Archon Stretch, which is a nice bonus. So which companion is best for you? Let's go over the pros and cons. The Hound has the highest priming potential. It's immortal with Pack Leader, and provides passive armor strip thanks to Vicious Bond. The drawbacks? The Hound's AI can be a little buggy. It doesn't follow you perfectly like a Sentinel. Plus, it doesn't have access to Tenacious Bond. And that wraps up the guide. If you found it helpful, please leave a like, and if you've got questions, drop them in the comments. Huge thanks again everyone for 1,000 subscribers. I couldn't have done it without you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.